Hello there, guys. It's been a very full week and I'm feeling quite tired. This week I worked a lot on writing. I was writing about nutrition, the vitamins and minerals that we get from food. I also did a lot of work for Familia de Trigo, printing orders and etiquetas so that books can be mailed out to people that bought them. And I also did some extra jobs. I cleaned the carpet from the church and took some clothes to the costurera and worked with my kittens in back, and they are doing better. It seems every few days they take a step forward, so it's good to see. But as a result, I'm feeling very tired and my brain up here just doesn't want to work. So, I'm afraid there's not going to be a story or a lesson this week unless I get my brain going. So what do y'all think? Should I try and get my brain going, or should I just quit? What's that? I didn't hear you. You got to say it louder. Should I try and get my brain going, or just quit? You think I ought to try? Okay, I'll take some coffee here. Didn't work. Nope. Shall we try one more time? Let's try one more time. Woo! Yep, that did it. I can tell you a story now. And today, our story is about Franny's nest. Franny's nest is a very old story that my dad, Grandpa Gardner, used to tell me. And I thought I would try and tell you all today. But it's a story about two robins. Let me open it here to the first page. And we know that these birds are robins because they both have red on their tummies. See right here, she has red. And this one's a little harder to see it because she has clothes on, but right here on the bottom you can tell she has red. And they're a medium-sized bird. They have brown feathers and yellow beaks. And they like to spend a lot of time on the ground. They hop around finding worms and seeds. But they do climb trees and, pardon me, they're birds. They don't climb trees. They fly up into trees. But anyway, they fly up into trees to make their nests and also to escape from cats and dogs, etc. So, let me start reading our story. But before we start, you need to know that this is Franny. She's an old-fashioned robin. That means she does things the way her mama did it and her grandma did it, the way God tells us to do it in the Bible. And this is Fancy. She's much more modern. She likes to always do new things. She doesn't want to do things the way her mama did it or grandma did it. She doesn't really care if it's the right way, if it's what makes God happy. She just likes to do what's new and easy. So, let me start reading here. One bright spring morning, Franny Robin, who was rather old-fashioned in her ways, met modern, up-to-date Fancy Robin in a cherry tree. "Good morning," chirped Fancy. "Have you chosen a place for your nest yet?" "Yes," answered Franny. "I've decided to build it in that big pine tree over there. How about you?" Fancy pointed in the opposite direction. She knew it wasn't polite to build her nest in the same area that Franny was building in. If two robins build their nests in the same place, there's never enough food for both families. So Fancy had decided to build her nest in an apple tree over across the way. That way they would all have plenty of room and food. She said, "I'm going to go get started on my nest. Why don't you come over for a visit when you're finished?" We were just talking about how Franny and Fancy were finding trees to make their nest. And it's very possible that they were finding trees in a little wooded area, kind of like this. See, look at all those trees behind me. This is at Nelson Bug Park, and it's the perfect place for birds to live. In fact, if we're quiet, I think you can hear them chirping. Let me be quiet a little bit. Did you hear all those birds chirping? God made it so that birds like wooded areas like this, because all these trees provide what birds need to live. The trees are high, so they give the birds places to hide. They also have food in them. There's lots of bugs in these trees, and some of the trees make berries, so the birds have plenty to eat. And if we were to walk down that way, we'd find a river, and that's where the birds can get their drinks. So if I were Franny or Fancy, I would be looking for trees in here to make my nest. After she was done talking with Franny, Fancy flew back to her own tree and began the hard work of looking for building materials so that she could make her nest. As she looked for sticks and leaves, she started to complain. Every year when spring comes around, it's the same thing. I have to search and search and search for bark and twigs and other things to build my nest. I wish it wasn't so hard, she said. And at that moment, Fancy stopped and looked down. Her black, beady eye had discovered something on the ground. Quickly, she made a graceful landing beside the things that she saw. The trash men had gone by that morning and had been rather careless. A trash bag had opened up, and there were a number of pink tissues blowing around on the ground that the trash men had left behind. Oh my, she was interested in that. "What have we here?" asked Fancy excitedly. "These would be just the thing for my nest," she thought. "They're pretty, and they're soft, and oh, they're light. They'll be easy for me to carry up into the tree." What a streak of good luck, she thought. And they're so pretty, too. She picked up as many tissues as she could carry in her beak and flew back to the apple tree, where she started to build her nest. In just a few minutes, she was back for more tissues. Fancy chuckled to herself as she made the foundation of her nest with the tissues. This was so much easier than looking around for pieces of barks and twigs. "I'll just mix in a few leaves, and presto, my nest will be done," she said. "Really, this is much better than the old-fashioned way." In just a few minutes, Fancy had finished her nest. It looked neat and strong. It was well hidden among the leaves of the apple tree. She flew off and stood on another branch to be able to look back at her work. "I really must fly over to the pine tree and tell Franny about my good fortune," Fancy said. Then she added generously, "Franny is my friend. I'll tell her about the tissues, and there's even enough for her to use for her nest, too. Fancy flew across the yard to the big pine tree. She made it plain from the start that she wasn't there to find nesting materials or food. She knew this was Franny's territory. She had just come for a visit. Franny was hard at work. She had just found a big piece of bark and was flying with it in her beak back to where she was building her nest. "Oh, Franny," gushed Fancy, "I've had the best luck. I found a whole pile of modern building materials in the backyard next door, and I used them for my nest. It was so much easier than building the nest the way you're doing it. I didn't have to look much at all for materials, and would you believe it? I'm already done building my nest." "Already finished?" gasped Franny. "Why, I'm barely getting started." "I know," agreed Fancy sympathetically. "When you do it the old-fashioned, hard way, it takes forever to do. Now, if you'll do it the easy way like I did, you'll soon be done." "But," said Franny, "are the building materials that you used as strong as twigs and bark?" "Of course," said Franny. "Come, I'll show you my nest, and if you like it, I'll show you where you can find the building materials that I used." The two robins flew together over to the apple tree, and in a moment Franny was looking over Fancy's nest. She looked it over the top and the bottom and the sides. She even touched the inside and said, "Well, it looks strong and sturdy enough." "Oh, it is," said Fancy. "Come, let's go get some tissues for you to use." So Fancy flew over to where the trash had spilled to show Franny the tissues. Franny landed down on the ground beside the trash can, and she hesitated as she picked up the tissues. "Is this flimsy stuff the building material you spoke of?" she said. "Oh, yes," said Fancy. "What's wrong with it?" "Oh," Franny said, "it looks weak to me. Look how soft and flexible it is. I wouldn't trust it for my nest. Thanks for showing it to me, but I prefer to build my nest the old-fashioned way, even if it does take more work." And with that, Franny flew off to finish her nest. That made Fancy a little bit angry. Now, it wasn't the right thing for her to do, but as I said before, Fancy wasn't really interested in doing the right thing. So she started screaming after Francy, "You're an old-fashioned robin. You're hopeless. You'll spend your life doing hard, old-fashioned work. Look, go ahead, work your feathers off if you want. I'm going to enjoy myself." And after that, Fancy spent the rest of that day and the next day or two gossiping with her friends and hunting fat, juicy worms for herself. And while she was having an easy time, Franny was having a hard time making her nest. Nutella and I are here to share a very interesting fact with you. Did you know that birds, when they're building a nest, they don't just pick up a bunch of branches and stick them up in a tree? No, God taught them how to do it, and it's very interesting. And I learned this from having canaries. But when a bird is building a nest, it picks up big sticks. Let me see if I can find one here. Yeah, something like this. Only it may be shorter or longer depending on the size of the bird. But they pick up big sticks like this, and they weave them together to make the outside of the nest. That way the outside of the nest is strong enough to withstand rain and wind and even other birds that perhaps come to hurt the nest. So they make the outside of the nest of big strong sticks, and then they get smaller sticks to make the inside. Smaller sticks, kind of like this. And they weave these together on the inside so that the inside isn't as rough. And then on the very inside of their nest, they line the nest with soft bits of dry grass or leaves. See, here's a little leaf. It's kind of dry and soft. And some mama birds will even pluck out their feathers on their chest and put it around their nest. And they do that because when baby birds hatch out of their eggs, they're all naked. It's just their skin against the nest. And if the nest wasn't soft, they would get hurt. They would also get cold because they don't have any feathers to keep them warm. So the soft stuff that the mama bird puts around the nest helps to keep her babies warm. So when Franny is making her nest the way God taught her to, you now know she's giving it several different layers and how important that is. And when Fanny decides, I'm going to do it the easy way, the old way that God said to do it is too hard, now you know why that's a bad idea. Now let's get back to our story. 2 or 3 days later, Fancy was ready to lay her eggs. She went back to her nest and softened out the inside, and then she got into it and laid a few eggs. After a lot of work, Franny also finished her nest and laid her eggs. Both birds were good mothers. They were careful to sit on their nest to keep the eggs warm, and they would turn the eggs now and again so that the babies would grow well. They never left the nest except when they needed to eat a little bit. Every day went by until one day the clouds began to build up. All day long the clouds became thicker and darker, and that night it began to rain. And it was not just a little rain, but it was a hard, steady rain that lasted for hours. Oops, turned too many pages there. Fancy was sitting on her nest as she felt the rain come down, and she was worried. She could feel that her nest was getting soggy. She began to worry that the modern building materials, even though it was nice and bright and soft and it was so easy to make, she was worried that it wouldn't make a good nest. After a long, restless night, Fancy found out that her easy work didn't last. As the morning began to dawn, the foundation of Fancy's nest gave way completely. Down, down, down dropped her precious eggs, and they smashed onto the ground beneath the apple tree. Fancy was so sad. She hopped out of the nest and sat perched in the apple tree with the rain falling around her as she looked at the eggs down on the ground. Yes, she thought to herself, it would have been better if she had stuck to the old-fashioned materials and the right way of doing things. Now we flip to our cover. That rainy night, it's Franny, not Fancy. Franny also sat on her nest. The rain hit all on top of her, but she wasn't worried. Her eggs were safe. Franny had done her work the hard way, but it was the right way, and because she did it the right way, it gave her many blessings. She had a strong nest. When the rain and the wind came, she didn't need to worry if it would last or not. Her nest gave her and her eggs a safe place to stay. And one day, her healthy babies could live in the nest without her needing to worry. God has made it so that, like Franny, if we do our work the right way that pleases Him, He will bless it.
Well, Apollo and Martha, I hope y'all enjoyed this story. I've really enjoyed getting it ready for y'all. There's a lot of lessons that you can learn from Franny and Fancy, but there's one lesson I'd like you to learn especially, and that is that God made man, He made Apollo, and He made Martha to do work. When God first made Adam and Eve, He put them in the Garden of Eden and told them to keep it. That was hard work to take care of a garden. But God made them to do that. And so working is good for them. And it's good for us. Now, whenever we have some work in front of us, whether it's cleaning out clothes that are too little, or putting away our toys, or whether it's really hard work like your schoolwork, or daddy's work on the computer, or mommy's taking care of the whole house, we usually have two choices. We can do our work the right way, and it's really hard, or we can do the shortcut way and do it as easy as possible so that we can get out and do fun stuff, just like Fanny did. So I hope you all will remember to always choose to do the work the right way. And yes, it is hard. It's easy to give up. But God has promised to give us grace to do things the right way. And I hope you all will learn to do that. To be like Franny and do your work the right way, the way that pleases God, even if it is hard. I hope y'all will have an enjoyable time this week. And remember that Tia, and also Grandma, and even Nutella, we love you.